Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Update Book Review Roundup first ever episode. I thought I would do something a little different than most Easy Updates. We're just going to take it easy and have a chat. We're going to chat together, but it'll be a one-sided conversation kind of chat where I just talk and you write things later. So an asynchronous chat. But anyway, a lot of times people ask us about books or ask me about books that I've read and liked. So I thought I would just round up and kind of quickly discuss. I'm not going to go too in depth in all of these because there are quite a lot of them. But I thought it'd be fun to just talk about books for a hot minute. Basically, since I moved to LA, I use Audible. This isn't sponsored or anything. I really like Audible, but I listen to books in my car all the time, and so I pretty much just burn through books all the time when I'm driving. I listen at 1.5 speed, usually. It's great. It takes a Stormlight Archive book and cuts it down from 53 hours to 26-ish. It's necessary. But anyway, yeah. So this is mostly books that I've read in the last couple of years, a few from before that. But yeah. So I've got a giant list of books grouped by author. So I didn't necessarily read them all in one go, listen to, read, whatever. But yeah, I thought it'd be fun to talk about books because that's not something we talk about all the time. Anyway, okay. So first off, one of my faves recently. Before the movie came out, I had read all of these by Jeff VanderMeer. I mean, I've read quite a few of his books now, but the Southern Reach Trilogy, which includes Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance. These all three, I believe, came out in 2014 and was recently made. Annihilation was recently very, very loosely adapted into a movie. Normally I can divorce myself from the book or source material when watching a movie. This one I found it hard to do, and the interpretation or misinterpretation of the books I found a little irksome at first. I mean, it's a great movie. I really liked it, but I just love the books so much more that it was tough for me. But they're just different. I have to view them as different things. But Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance are three breezy little books, quick, short books. Basically, the Southern Reach Trilogy, the Area X. Sometimes it's marketed as Area X. The three books encompass like the size of one big novel. I love these three books very, very much. They tell a story. I'm not going to spoil or get into anything in any of these books, but they tell a story of a strange area called Area X that is unexplained, and the groups of people that have been sent in by a weird kind of pseudo-government called the Southern Reach to investigate, and the different groups have met with various misfortunes, and you just find out more about that. The first book is about a group of, I believe, 4 or 5 women who go into Area X, and you don't ever know their names, you just know them by their professions. So there's like the biologist, the psychiatrist, etc. And that the Annihilation talks about their kind of experience within Area X, and then Authority takes place in the main office of the Southern Reach, and then Acceptance is sort of a mixture of both, and they're all so good. Yeah, they're very good. Similar to that, also by Jeff VanderMeer, which came out in 2017, is a book called Born, which is also kind of Born is more of a post-apocalyptic thing. The Southern Reach, you don't really get much of the scope outside of Area X and the surrounding environs, but it doesn't seem as though the world has come to an end necessarily. Born, for sure it has. Corporations and bioengineering and stuff have run amok, and the world is quite bizarro, and it's sort of like a bio-horror kind of Cronenbergian sort of nightmare world, and it's really great. I really enjoyed it. Born, B-O-R-N-E, 2017. And then there's a short story that accompanies it called The Strange Bird, a Bourne story, which is really quick, and there's an audiobook of that too. And it's very affecting and very sad. And all of his whole... And I'm very much looking forward to The Three Dead Astronauts, which is a Bourne book. The audiobook, I believe, comes out, maybe in a couple of days, actually. Yeah. That's exciting. But anyway, there's sort of... His writing style is so interesting because it's detached and yet still shows a great emotional sensitivity, I think. It has... There's just something about it that just feels right for me. Feels very... I feel at home kind of in his prose. It's very strange when the subject matter is so dark and strange. But that's just how it kind of makes me feel. Jeff VanderMeer, I highly recommend those books. This whole video won't just be books I really like. Some of these I didn't care for, but we'll get into those. But books I did like, and I'll discuss sort of one chunk of these as one kind of the Sprawl series by William Gibson, Neuromancer, Count Zero, Mona Lisa Overdrive, and Burning Chrome is like a short story that I believe is still within the Sprawl series. And I've read several of others of his, but these are... Neuromancer is basically credited with the creation of the idea of cyberpunk. Like the term The Matrix, I think, is from that, and like cyberspace is from that, and very much of this sort of netrunner ideas and cyberpunk as the whole was sort of invented and coined in no small part, at least, by Neuromancer and William Gibson. I know there are a lot of other contributors as well, but he was one of the early ones, if not the first. And these books are good. They're good. William Gibson actually is an interesting author because I believe he said, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously it's not a direct quote, but he said something along the lines of he makes the first chapter of his books usually the most difficult to weed out the people who won't like them. So it's just like you have to pass because his books definitely, this is true of the Peripheral too, which I'll talk about in a second, but they aren't immediately accessible all the time. And I think that's by design. He's like, look, these are hard sci-fi. They're not easy. They're challenging. And he said something like that. I think that was just like, I'm gonna weed them out, which is kind of funny to me. But Neuromancer, yeah, it's very cyberpunk. It's about contract hackers and seedy stuff and augmented body parts and stuff. There, if you like that, we might as well start at the beginning. Go to the source. They're good. The Peripheral, Neuromancer came out in 1984. Burning Chrome was 1982, so a little earlier than that. And then Count Zero 86, Mona Lisa Overdrive 88. I forgot to say Bourne and Strange Bird were 2017 by Jeff VanderMeer. The Peripheral, though, came out in 2014. William Gibson's still writing. The Peripheral is very interesting. It's sort of... I don't want to say too much because I don't want to ruin it, but I really liked it. The less you know, kind of going into stuff like this, sometimes the better. But it deals with cool, hard sci-fi stuff, and really interesting way of doing a certain sort of sci-fi trope that I think is hard to do and not often done very well. And the Peripheral is very interesting, and I believe that it's getting a series, I want to say by Amazon. Somebody has a series order, I believe, for the Peripheral. And he is writing a sequel, which when he put out the Peripheral, I finished it, and I was like, oh man, are you going to write another one of these? Because I really wanted to like live in that world some more. And at the time, he had said, no, I think it's a standalone, it's done. Even though the end, kind of leaves it up to the world continues to exist, He actually is writing a sequel. How direct it'll be, I don't know. But it, I guess, is speculative fiction because it sort of just accidentally takes place in a reality where Hillary Clinton won. So it's kind of a different branch. He was writing it at the time, just kind of like, I guess, going with that assumption. And then she didn't win. And he was just like, well, more speculative, I guess. And it is apparently in the same reality as the Peripheral, so that'll be cool. Looking forward to that. I don't have any information on it currently when it comes out. Next author up is one of the big boys as far as fantasy goes. We're talking Brandon Sanderson, Stormlight Archive, Mistborn, countless others. The Way of Kings, 2010, Words of Radiance, 2014, and Oathbringer, 2017, make up the Stormlight Archive, which is... it rivals Wheel of Time in scope and size. These are long books, big boys. Like, I think Oathbringer was like 53 hours on audiobook or something like that. It's pretty bonkzors, but they are very good. He, what does he call it? Something like third creation or whatever, world creation. This dude is unrivaled, like Tolkien levels of world creation. Secondary creation? Whatever. The sort of systems of magic, he makes these hard, crunchy systems of magic that have very good cost, and he's released essays or discussed what he thinks are good magic systems, and I think he makes some of the best magic systems I've encountered, where in Stormlight Archive you use light, and you can only get that kind of stormlight, from storms. And they're just like, it's basically got like physics and stuff in it. And these books are just sweeping, huge narratives, and they have classical style heroes like coming up from nothing and going on to greatness, and intertwining storylines that are massive, and things that are set up in one book pay off 3 books later. And there are intertwining threads over the Cosmere, which is the sort of universe that his books all kind of take place within. So Mistborn and Warbreaker and all these other books take place within, or series and books take place within his Cosmere, and there are some characters that kind of interweave between all of them, and it's all very mysterious and interesting. They're very, very fun and good. If you like super long, super hardcore fantasy, Stormlight Archive, some of the best I've read. I really loved Mistborn Trilogy as well, the first Mistborn Trilogy. I haven't done the other one, too. The Final Empire, 2006, The Well of Ascension, 2007, and The Hero of Ages, 2008. Also, Brandon Sanderson, his output is astonishing. These books are so long, and the frequency with which they are released is terrifying to me. Like, the amount of work he does, and I think he has like a staff that keeps track of continuity for him or something like that, but you'd almost have to. But yeah, and apparently he's a nice guy. Friends of mine have met him. But yeah, I really love the Mistborn Trilogy. They're shorter, they're more accessible, but no less crunchy or thought out. The world of that series is very cool to me. The magic system involves ingesting bits of metal, and then you can burn them in your stomach to do different powers. And a Mistborn is basically like an avatar who can burn all the metals. And these books are very, very good, and the magic system is super cool. I would highly recommend them. The Final Empire is the first Mistborn book. It's a good jumping in place if you're interested in Brandon Sanderson. I listened to Warbreaker most recently of his after Oathbringer, and it was good. It was definitely one of his earlier novels, and not earliest, but and I didn't love it as much as the others, just because the magic system was cool, but kind of a little weirder, and it involves color, like taking color from stuff and like bringing cloth to life. And I mean, it was good. Nothing that I've read of his is bad, but certainly it was the weakest of the ones of his I've read. Which again, not to say that it was bad. It's like an 8 instead of a 10, So still good, but not as good. Next up, a little bit of an outlier from the speculative fiction, sci-fi, fantasy romp we've been on so far is As You Wish, Inconceivable Tales from the Making of Princess Bride, which came out in 2014 and was written by Cary Elwes and Joe Layden. Cary Elwes, as you may or may not know, is the man in black in The Princess Bride, one of my favorite movies of all time. Well, probably my favorite movie of all time. And boy, I tell you, this audiobook is just a delight because it's got a lot of interviews and quotes from various people, and by and large, most of them voice their own parts in the audiobook. So you've got Rob Reiner and whoever saying their actual parts, and it's just a delight. It's just fantastic. All right, next up, Peter Clines, author. Books 14, which came out in 2012, and The Fold, 2015, are sort of horror, kind of sci-fi, horror, fantasy books, loosely connected in the same kind of series. They're not, they're not Nabokov or anything, but they are so cozy and lovely, and I just had a lot of fun with these books. Also, Paradox Bound is a more recent one of his. They're more like light fiction, light sci-fi, not hard sci-fi, maybe. I would love to adapt 14 into a TV series. I think it would be a really fun TV series. But yeah, Peter Clines, 14, and The Fold, I really enjoyed. Sort of in line with the sci-fi trend that you may have sensed thus far in this. Neal Stephenson, kind of the opposite of Peter Clines, pretty hardcore sci-fi, not always great at endings, but really good writer. Snow Crash, 1992, sort of like Neuromancer, kind of a cyberpunk corporations have taken over everything kind of a book. Really cool, really good. Diamond Age, 1995, was really cool. Nanotechnology has sort of flourished, and like everybody's got nanobots in their blood, and criminals can be tracked and like even put down with the nano machines in their blood, and different neighborhoods and areas are blocked with invisible wire or like mesh nets of nanobots, and like if you're not supposed to go into a certain gated community, they will block you, that kind of stuff. Pretty cool. Yeah, ends very abruptly, just kind of stops, if I recall correctly. I read this one actually back in college, but still really cool. That was my first one of his that I read. And then I recently read Seven Eves, which came out in 2015, which I really liked. It's about, it starts when the moon breaks up, kind of inexplicably breaks up into a bunch of chunks, and it kind of just goes from there, and is about humanity trying to handle that and the implications of that, and it goes and goes, and it's really good. It also sort of just stops at a certain point. It's interesting with audiobooks because you don't know how far into, unless you check how much time is left, which I don't really do, you don't often know how close to the end of a book you are. So when it suddenly says epilogue or whatever, you're like, oh, okay. But Seven Eves is really cool. Really liked it. Yeah, Neal Stephenson. Check it out. Dennis E. Taylor, kind of more in the Peter Clines camp, sort of more fun, lighter sci-fi. Still, technically, scientific, but kind of more fun lighter romp it through sci-fi. The 3 books that I read of his are part of the Bobaverse. The books are We Are Legion, We Are Bob, 2016, For We Are Many, 2017, and All These Worlds, 2017. And they are about a guy named Bob who signs up to be cryogenically frozen after getting a bunch of money for some software stuff that he did in modern times, and then immediately getting hit by a car and dying, and so wakes up hundreds of years later in sort of a bizarro future theocracy, and they've woken him up as an AI so that he can pilot this ship to try to get humanity out into space. And it's very cool about him going out into space and like replicating himself, becoming new versions of his AI to control different aspects of these other ships, which are copies of himself, but they all have like a little different personalities, sort of like Multiplicity, kind of, if you've seen that movie. But they're a lot of fun. They're worth the read or the listen, I think. Yeah, again, not like Shakespeare, but like just a lot of fun. Next up, Philip Pullman, whose books are the His Dark Materials trilogy, which in America were called The Golden Compass, The Subtle Knife, and The Amber Spyglass. I don't have the years for those in front of me here. I know in other regions they had different names. I think one of them is called The Northern Lights. I don't recall which is called that. But those are very good, very interesting. But recently I read The Book of Dust, La Belle Sauvage, Book 1, which came out in 2017, which is a prequel, the beginning of a prequel trilogy, I think a trilogy, to the His Dark Materials books. And it was very nice. This one has a little boy as the protagonist. Takes place in a very interesting world. You have a daemon, which is like, or a demon, which is your soul, basically. It's external from your body. So everyone has kind of a friend they can talk to all the time. And it's about this kid and... well, I don't want to give too much away, but it ties into the original trilogy in an interesting way and is very pleasant. A book I recently listened to called The Argonauts, which is by Maggie Nelson, 2015, is sort of a nonfiction, very poetic, very poetically written prose. I believe that Maggie Nelson does poetry also. I'm not overly familiar with Maggie Nelson or their partner, and the book largely involves their family, so I didn't really have that kind of like real world knowledge to glom onto with regard to the Argonauts, but the writing is just so well done that I really felt it was cool. And the subject material about being in trans and genderqueer and lesbian kind of circles and relationships and stuff like that, it was all very interesting to me. Not knowing of them really in real life and stuff, it didn't grab me super much, but some of the passages you're reading this thing and you're just like, wow, this prose is so good. But this is another example of why I like audiobooks a lot, because they just keep going, whereas when I'm reading analog, have a tendency to just kind of like put something down, intending to go back to it, but then I just never do. And I had done that with the Argonauts actually previously. Someone had given it to me as a gift, and I read the first part of it and I was really liking the way it was written, but then I just kind of like got distracted with other stuff and didn't go back, and so then I finally finished it on audiobook, which I really liked. Next up is Bird Box by Josh Mallerman from 2014. I believe Josh Mallerman is in some band, I don't know. But Bird Box is about, it's kind of a horror story, and it's about these sort of like The Happening, that terrible, terrible movie by M. Night Shyamalan, but like something just causes people to go crazy and like kill all people around them and then themselves. And they have determined before the book begins that it's, if you see this thing, you go crazy. Your brain can't handle it, and you just go completely insane and take anyone out around you and then yourself. And so the whole book is about this woman and these two children who she's trained the children to basically live without ever using their eyes. Anytime they go outside, they wear blindfolds. They're not blind, but they force themselves. They have to be blind when they're out in the world, or they could see one of these, whatever you see that makes you go nuts. And yeah, it's really interesting. It was pretty tense. I was thinking while reading it, like, how would you do this as a movie? Because, like, you can't show the things, right? Because that's the whole point. So I was thinking maybe, like, it's kind of like A Quiet Place sort of vibes, where you have it all very sound based, and maybe it's black and white whenever someone is outside with a blindfold on. I don't know. That was just something that came to my mind. But Bird Box, it was a pretty interesting book. Yeah, not my favorite book ever, but it was good. The next up is a book by China Miéville. There was a way that the audiobook I pronounced it that surprised me, but it's Miéville. Mieville, Perdido Street Station, came out in 2000. This is one of those books. I had started it a long time ago, probably around when it came out, reading it analog, and put it down for whatever reason. I forgot that I had done that, because when I was listening to the book, I was like, wow, a lot of this is really familiar. And it was one of those books where at first I was like, wow, this is really cool. The world building is really cool. I really like this place. It's so it's very Naked Lunch, kind of weird, nasty, all kinds of different types of creatures and people mixed together. Some people are bug people and some people are frog people. Some are humans. Some are kind of maybe various other kinds of people, amalgamations of machinery and human beings and other animals. And that was all very cool, and it was very gritty. And the story at first started off so good, and then the story kind of just abandons a lot of the stuff that it sets up front, goes in a whole other different direction, and then toward the end, it sort of just throws another bunch of little wrenches in there for kind of no reason, and it has a very unsatisfactory ending. The writing style is kind of repetitive and mostly leans on kind of just descriptions of the city ad nauseum, and after a while it kind of just wears on a person. It sort of drags. So yeah, I did not really care for Perdido Street Station. All in all, at the end of the day, I sort of wished I hadn't given it the time. Which is a real bummer, because it had a lot of really cool stuff going for it, but it just went on so long, and then the ending kind of just felt unsatisfying in an almost cruel way. It's kind of weird to say, I guess, but yeah, I just don't know. Anyway, on to a positive note, I just for the first time, weirdly enough, Margaret Atwood had been a blind spot for me. I had never read any of her stuff, and it was not The Handmaid's Tale, as you may have guessed, but I recently listened to the Mad Adam trilogy, which are Oryx and Crake, 2003. How did we say years in the early 2000s? Did we say 2003? No, we said 2003. Yeah. It's been a while. Then The Year of the Flood is the second book, 2009, and then Mad Adam, 2013. That's just easier to say, 2013. These books are very interesting. They're about groups of people after a disease has kind of killed off most of humanity, and Oryx and Crake is told in such an interesting way, where it begins in what is the present of the book, which would be our future, and then flashes back, so we get the story is filled in, and the main character of that is named Jimmy, and or also known as Snowman, and it's about his kind of relationship with these people called Oryx and Crake, and they're kind of scientific creations, and they're megacorps that sort of are gated communities, and they're super rich and nice, but then they call normal cities the plebe lands, where things are a lot more rough and money isn't as easy to come by and stuff like that. And it's all about this kind of classist differences, and also science and super science going too far, and kind of that. I don't want to say too much, because these are very worth it and really interesting. And the audiobooks, especially for The Year of the Flood, are really interesting because it has songs in it, which is a fun novelty. When you're listening at 1.5, it's a little... after a while, you're kind of okay. But yeah, I really liked those books. I just finished Mad Adam a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, very, very good stuff. Okay, the next one I am currently reading right now. So I haven't finished it, but I am loving it to pieces. And I am going to do my best with the author's name, which I believe is Cixin Liu. But the book is The Three-Body Problem, and it is very good. Beginning book of a trilogy. I know the name of one of them is something like Dark Forest. I've intentionally not looked into the rest of the books too much because I already knew a little bit going in that I wish I hadn't known. That's kind of colored my read of this book so far, but this book is so good. I'm really loving it. And apparently also Amazon is going to make this into a series, I have heard, or something to that effect, maybe a movie. But yeah, the three-body problem is really good, and it's really interesting the way it's done, because it's a sci-fi story, but it's told in a way that makes it feel like it could be a realistic way of how things might go forward. And again, I haven't finished it yet, so don't spoil me. But I'm really loving it so far. A book I read a while back by Haruki Murakami, 1Q84. Oftentimes I accidentally say IQ84, but it's 1Q84 from 2010. It's a sort of sci-fi? I don't know, but it's a book told from two different perspectives, and I remember it has a very nice, like, the feel of this book is very unique and interesting. This is the only book of his that I've read. I know Kafka on the Shore and some other ones are supposed to be good. But yeah, this is my first of his, and I think his. And I really enjoyed it. 1Q84. Books I didn't enjoy as much, actually, and I'm kind of surprised I didn't. But The Name of the Wind from 2007 by Patrick Rothfuss, and Wise Man's Fear. I read The Name of the Wind and I quit halfway through Wise Man's Fear, which came out in 2011, because it does a thing that I find kind of annoying in fiction. Is it has the framing story of it's being told by this current super cool badass, but then the story, it's like, I'm going to tell you the story of my life, and then it just goes back to like when he's like a baby child in elementary school, kind of just dicking around, doing kind of whatever stuff, and it's not that interesting. And I'm like, I want to hear, like, the person you are now seems really awesome, and the world you're inhabiting now sounds really cool. I don't care about you in high school. I don't want to hear about it. So I kind of got tired of it, and I stopped listening. I know a lot of people really like these books. I don't know. For some reason, it wasn't grabbing me. Which is funny, because the Brandon Sanderson stuff, are lugubrious sometimes and definitely very detailed, but there's just something about these didn't snag me. Similarly, and kind of contrary to what I just said, the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, which there are, 8 or 9 books, whatever, and they came out over the course of whatever. They kind of jump around and tell backstories and stuff, but they're shorter, and maybe the settings were more interesting to me. Well, they're not all shorter, but yeah, I don't know. The books were really cool. They kind of falter toward the end, and the ending is sort of legendarily not perfect. And the movie was not good, but having read the books, the movie was a little more interesting because it's sort of a continuation of the books, which gave it a little something different. But yeah, the Dark Tower series I really liked, but you kind of just have to take it with a grain of salt, because you sort of have to say, like, okay, I'm here for the super fun, crazy, cool stuff, and if you're a fan of any of the other Stephen King stuff, then the tie-ins are all really interesting. But, yeah, narratively, they get really bonkers toward the end, like Stephen King is in them. Stephen King in the book, actually, in the last book, tells you not to read the ending, which, it's an interesting experiment. Yeah, I don't know. They're fun. They're good. I don't know. They're weird. But yeah, Dark Tower. Oh, Dark Tower. We hardly knew ye. Sort of similar to like crazy, long, weird space epics. Not space, Dark Tower, but whatever. Dan Simmons wrote in 1989 a book called Hyperion, which I think is phenomenal. And the follow-up books, Fall of Hyperion, Rise of Endymion, and Endymion, are less good, but still good. But yeah, Hyperion I highly recommend. It's sort of a series of little vignettes, if I recall correctly, and really interesting stuff. Some pretty wild stuff in there. On the more non-fiction side of things, if you haven't ever read Eric Larson's The Devil in the White City, which came out in 2003, it's about the Chicago World's Fair and, what's his name? H.L. Holmes? Is that the right letters? Whatever, like crazy murderer who had like a murder house. And it's about that whole kind of situation. It's really interestingly written. Like, the descriptions are such that you just feel like, ugh, like all the murders and stuff just make you feel kind of like blah, but it's like real. So yeah, Devil in the White City is super good. And then of course I would be remiss if I didn't mention just some other all-time faves over the years. Vladimir Nabokov is one of my favorites. Obviously, Lolita's phenomenal. Invitation to a Beheading is really, really good. I actually I adapted it into a screenplay years ago back in college. I'm sure it's terrible, but never got around to seeing if I could get the rights or anything to that, but I did do that. Anyway, I like that book a lot. It's about... Lolita, everybody knows what Lolita is about generally. But Invitation to a Beheading is about a man named Cincinnatus who is accused of Gnostical turpitude. Turpitude, which is sort of just like a nondescript imagination crime, sort of, that's never really defined. And he's just sort of in prison waiting to have his head cut off. And everyone in the jail is like really nonsensical and bizarre, and it's all very interesting. And then Speak Memory, which is Nabokov's autobiography. His writing is just so genius, and like Speak Memory, some of the first lines and paragraphs are just so well written, it'll melt your face. Pale Fire, likewise, is just, which I haven't actually finished the whole entirety of, but I have 2 copies of it on my shelf behind me, so I can compare. Pale Fire is a 999-line poem, and then a person who's writing an analysis about that and its author. But immediately, as you are wont to do in a Nabokov book, as you normally do, you discover that the author is not exactly reliable, kind of a nut job. So it's very interesting. But Speak Memory, oh my God, there's like I can't remember it directly, but something about being in a cradle in the beginning part is just genius. And then one of my other all-time favorite books is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. And I've also read The Road and No Country for Old Men by him. And I started Suttree. I didn't finish that one. Child of God I didn't like as much. But God almighty, Blood Meridian. Whew. No Country's genius. And like the movie is almost a direct. I think there were only a very few changes, which is pretty impressive. McCarthy's books are so interesting because a lot of times his characters are more like archetypes than human beings, and Blood Meridian is a prime example of that because there's a character in it that basically is just kind of war itself. And like No Country for Old Men, I would argue that Llewellyn is sort of humans or neutral stances, and like Anton Chigurh is evil, and Ed Tom is sort of good, but also just there's just so much to it. But like the cop, Tommy Lee Jones's character, has to, you have to be polluted to fight this kind of evil. Like there is no staying good to fight this kind of bad, and Llewellyn Moss tries to cut down the center, and just the narrative subversions and stuff. There are countless videos analyzing No Country for Old Men, and I do think it's one of the most perfect films ever made, in my opinion. But truly love it. But Blood Meridian, just epic, wonderfully written. McCarthy has a style, like he doesn't use quotation marks, so there's that. But it's just so phenomenal, fantastic book. Also, the single most violent thing I think I have ever encountered in my entire life. Very graphic, very brutal. So if that isn't your cup of tea, steer clear of Blood Meridian. Because, boy, is that ever intense. Dead baby trees and stuff. Like, for starters. Yeah. But anyway, this has been like 40-something minutes, maybe longer, of me just rambling about books. What books do you like? What have you read that you enjoyed? Please, again, in the comments, don't spoil anyone, especially me, on Three Body Problem, for example. Try to respect your fellow commenters. But yeah, please share any books that you've liked. And if you've read any of the ones that I've mentioned, tell me what you think of them. Tell me I'm crazy for disliking Name of the Wind, for example. I want to hear about this stuff. I want to see different takes and reads on these books. No pun intended. Pun intended. Anyways, yeah, I don't know. Just thought I'd try something different. Talking about books. Pretty simple video production-wise here. Just sitting here. But, yeah. Thank you for joining me. Good night and good read.